Welcome to Praxis Journeys, where we explore the paths of today's most influential leaders in education and the real-world strategies they're using to drive lasting change. I'm Vinay Ganti. In each episode, I sit down with the people shaping the future of our schools to talk candidly about the big issues: teacher recruitment, leadership, innovation, school culture, policy, and more. Whether you're an educator, administrator, or advocate, you'll find fresh ideas and actionable insights to inform your own journey and help students thrive. Let's dive in.
And shares her extensive experience in public education, emphasizing the importance of continuous improvement, leadership, and community engagement. Dr. Dickson is currently the clinical professor in the Department of Educational Leadership and Policy and inaugural special assistant to the Dean of Strategic Initiative at the University of Utah. Prior to this appointment, Dr. Dickson served as Utah's State Superintendent of Public Instruction and is a lifelong educator and thought leader who discusses the evolving roles of educators, the impact of technology, and the need for a culture of learning that prepares students for the future. Dr. Dickson also offers advice for aspiring educators, highlighting the significance of problem-solving, building relationships in the educational landscape. So we hope you enjoy today's episode. Well, hello, welcome to the show. I guess let's start with giving you a chance to introduce yourself.
Well, thanks for having me. I am Sydnee Dickson. I am a lifelong public educator, 44 years. And I like to say I didn't retire, but I rewired from K-12 education. And I'm now in a university position where I'm a special advisor to the Dean of Education, Dr. Frankie Lanaughton at the University of Utah in the College of Education. And I love being in a different setting and learning new things. And it's just this continuation of learning from public pre-K-12 all the way to post-secondary and through post-secondary. So great experience to keep that continuum going.
Great. And so, why don't you sort of start, if you don't mind walking us back a little bit. So prior to the pre-wire, what was your sort of career number one, if you don't mind it?
Yeah, I mean, I've done all the things in public education that one might think of in a career path. So I was an elementary teacher and taught upper grades. I was a school counselor, an elementary principal, worked in a district office, worked in a high school, and then also in a district office. And the thread throughout all of that, through classroom to district work, was always continuous improvement. How do I improve myself? How do I help colleagues improve? How do we do that together? I had the good fortune to have great leaders who tapped me and saw potential in me to build my own leadership. So I did that, but leadership has always been the thread through my pathway. When I was at the district level, I could see that our new teachers were not getting the kind of support that they needed. So I did a lot of work around thinking about and working to implement more of a continuum of practice and support for pre-service teachers all the way to the end of their career, and did some great national work with colleagues from Missouri and West Virginia and Arkansas and Kansas, and I'm sure I'm going to miss a few states, but we worked on this national continuum that then became Model Core teaching standards. And so that passion continued with me when I went to the state office to help revise licensure and think about mentoring for new teachers, mentoring for principals, revamping standards to be more modernized. So doing some of that policy work that could then impact practice. And from there, I got into a number of roles, but ended up as a state superintendent for a little over 9 years. And during that time, again, just tried to really stay focused on not only supporting and building capacity in our educators, but helping leaders be better prepared to face the challenges that were ever present in their school communities, connecting with communities, with parents, setting up conditions for high levels of learning, all of the things that we know makes for best practices. So that's just kind of been my passion: adult learning, supporting school leaders. And the purpose of all of that always comes back to providing opportunities for success for every one of our young people.
So I love that. I love a couple of things that you touched on here, especially you emphasize the role of continuous improvement. There is no sort of endpoint. There's always sort of a need to reflect and need to go deeper. And I think your lens around, or your focus around leadership too, right? One of the things that I think about a lot is, we talk about how the teaching profession is sometimes an isolating profession, and oftentimes you feel like you're on an island. But I say that the metaphor I think is apt is that as a teacher, you're on an island, but at least you're part of an archipelago. You can at least see the other islands around you. right? And yes, you still have to like maybe build your own boat and forge ahead and actually like, get sort of those best practice sharing and collaboration through effort a lot of time. But at least you know that those other islands are there. Whereas oftentimes as a school leader and a district leader, you're on an island, but you're literally like on Fiji or something where it's like, well, actually, I don't know if Fiji is just one island, but I'm using it the metaphor where you're like a single island in the South Pacific and there's no one near you. It feels like there's no one nearby for thousands of miles. Um, so,
Well,
so
an
I'd love to
island in
see.
the South Pacific, I don't know that that's the right analogy because the islands in the South Pacific are beautiful. And I know a lot of
That's fair.
educators that would
Right.
love to go spend just a week quietly
They train.
on an
Right.
island in the South Pacific. But to your point, I love that, Vinay. I love the notion that yes, we've raised ourselves in this. We raised ourselves in this culture of isolation. We, and I mean we collectively, policymakers, practitioners, we truly have in the way we construct schools, in the way we set up schedules, in the way we teach in isolation. So we have created that culture. And then is it any wonder that people feel isolated and sometimes hesitant to collaborate? So you're absolutely spot on. But the higher up the ladder you go in terms of employment, I can tell you that certainly being a principal felt lonely at times, but I had a great cadre of colleagues around me. We work together often. When you're a superintendent, there are 51 of you plus territories, et cetera. So, I'll just throw out a round number of 60 when you've got the
Yeah.
Department of Defense schools and others. So it's a pretty small end size. And each state is governed very differently and politics come into play and policies. So yeah, it's that is something to really be studied and thoughtful about is the culture of isolation.
Yeah. And so as you've shifted now to more of an academic sort of lens, or maybe not academic is the right word because I think your role is largely clinical at this juncture. So, but at least a professorial lens and more of a what sort of opportunities or what is getting you excited today, given all the experience you have around leadership development, pipeline, all those things? Where do you see the biggest impact possible right now for you and other people in the EPP world when it comes to making a dent on some of these challenges?
Yeah, I love the question because I think we're ripe for greater understanding of what today's school leaders need and how it's truly a pipeline and it's more nimble. We've tended to think about it in very finite roles. You're a teacher, or you're a principal, or you're an assistant principal. And when you think about the continuum of a career for a teacher, our younger teachers think about careers very differently than my generation certainly did. And what they're looking for are opportunities to make a difference, and they want opportunities to lead out. So I have seen great shifts in thinking about teacher leadership. We have specialist roles in all of our states. They're out there working with adults and with students. And then in our state, we formed the Teacher Fellows. So it's an opportunity and organization that's really organic for teachers to come together and practice leadership, learning how to talk to legislators, for example, to help influence policy, or their local board members or state board members, thinking about how collectively they can engage in community service outside of their school, or how do they help build their profession. So there are a lot of things that this group tackles, and there are many organic groups rising up like that because they do want that opportunity for work life balance, but also to make a difference outside of their classroom. So I think we have to always think of it as, instead of this ladder that I alluded to before, it really ebbs and flows. And I think it's more of a continuum. And people can step in and out of various roles. And the part for me to think about in educator preparation is, how do we then take that nimble way of thinking and embed that into our preparation program so that we're talking about what does education look like in today's market? We have all of these different opportunities in micro schools and charters and traditional public schools and private schools. There's so many opportunities, after school programs, out of school programs and networks. So really preparing adults to adequately support, well, adequately seems like a little benchmark, to successfully support our students to have a lot of opportunities for success, not just one opportunity or one caring adult, but creating cultures of opportunities for students to really be prepared for the workforce, civic engagement, all the things that we know help towards success of our young people.
I mean, that's super interesting, right? Because I mean, historically, we've sort of treated career progression in K-12 education as like very deterministic to your point. Just like, once you go through one gate, that gate is forever like closed behind you and you can only move in one direction type of thing. And, it reminds me, my formal training actually comes from the legal side. I went to law school and all that stuff. And it's very similar, I think, sort of, the whole like distinction between a partner and of counsel, right? So like this like role that sort of showed up for people who didn't make partner, but like these firms didn't want to lose them, so they created this new role. But it was kind of one of those things like once you became a counsel, I don't think there was ever like a path back if you sort of changed your mind or decided that your life circumstances shit. There was like you have forever missed the opportunity to become partner, whether you wanted to or not.
Yeah.
And so like a lot of these other roles sort of become like backstop roles as opposed to aspirational things that people could work towards as well. Whereas what you're speaking to is like let's embrace the fact that there are a lot of different branches, and those branches could sort of weave back together, uh, and actually encourage people to go after them, but not sort of like a huge cost on their career for going after those roles. Like let's have like a messy let's allow for career like progression to be a little messier, right? A little less clean cut, because that actually might keep more people in the profession. Retention is one of the biggest challenges they're facing for teachers and leaders for that matter. Maybe that's one way to help address that, which is like, look, let's have a messier career journey and keep people engaged, keep people interested a little longer. It also
Yeah.
reminds me of a lot of the work that is coming out of like ASU with like the team teaching model and things like that, which is like, what about like more flexible sort of work environments that way too? So I think there's like a lot going on here, right? There's a lot of different dynamics here that we could be talking about to sort of keep as many people in the profession as long as possible, where then maybe when they're finally ready to become a leader, they can do it on their own terms, as opposed to feeling like they're being forced to do it on some sort of predetermined path, right?
I appreciate that. I'm thinking about the notion that's so important that it's everyone's job at school is to learn. All the adults, everybody, and we're all part of that ecosystem. I've recently visited a very promising program that we have in Davis District, and it's the Davis Teacher Academy. And it's the way that they're partnering with university prep programs to prepare teachers. And this model's been around for a while. It used to be called the Professional Development School model, where universities and districts partner together and the faculty is one. So the faculty of the university program, the faculty in the school, they work very closely together in supporting and preparing teachers, and coursework is actually done at the school. So at Sunburst Elementary in Davis District, for example, when they built this school, they built in university classroom space for observation and work, and they're thinking about a system where everybody's learning together. And so you can go into a classroom and you may not be able to differentiate between an aide teacher who's there, pre-service teacher who's there for a practicum, a teacher in their student teaching block, the regular classroom teacher. You just see these very fluid methodology of people moving in and out, and everybody has an assigned role and they know what it is. But the kids don't know. They just know that they've got people in and out of their classroom. And so the adults in the building become very comfortable with somebody like me bringing other adults in to watch what they're doing because they see themselves as a system of learning for both the adults and the kiddos in the school. And the students do well. The teachers have early and often touch points with cooperating teachers and other adults to help them grow and learn with that real time feedback, right? While they're on the job learning. And then they're getting the coursework and the professors are right there seeing what's happening in the classroom. So everything is very seamless rather than this fragmented way of the way we think about preparing and supporting teachers. So those kinds of programs are very helpful. You mentioned ASU, for sure, going and seeing what they're doing and the way that they're thinking about various roles of teachers. But, I don't want to go down a rabbit hole of pay, but let's think about the things that confine us. And when you have a steps and ladder model for paying educators, and many go into other parts of the profession so that they can make more money. And to your point that you made earlier, it makes it harder to step backwards, whether you're in a law firm or in a school setting. So that pay scale locks people into being able to be fluid. And I think we need to crack that nut for sure. First, by paying enough at the entry level that teachers can make a living wage right from the get go. It doesn't take them 30 years to own a house and a car, but they can do that fairly early in their career. We've started to do that in Utah. I think average starting wage here is around 65,000. Not great, but helpful, and it's been a concerted effort over the last 5 years or so to get there, and a governor and legislature who were willing to lean in and up the pay scale. Looking at the barriers, whether it's governance, pay, time, whatever it is, it's just like our schools. We have been conducting schools based on these barriers or a false sense of a barrier of, I call them the three B's: bells, buses, and butt time. That like we lock ourselves into this schedule, and yet we know that a more personalized approach for kids, more experiential, more hands on as you get into secondary, more experience in the workplace, but even in elementary, being able to move and be fluid and learn according to your pace and needs, that learning is the constant and time becomes the variable. And it's a very
Right.
different way of thinking about fluidity. So as we're thinking about systems like that for our students, what about our educators, the adults in the system?
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think wow, I mean, that's super interesting, right? Because I think one of the things that we're really excited about at ETS is sort of, I mean, this isn't the first time that people have gotten excited about a technology and sort of being sort of put it up on a pedestal, be like, this is the silver bullet. But one of the things that we're very excited about is we think that finally that AI has gotten to a point where it can help scale some of these models in a quality way. And that's where our role comes in. It's like, not all AI is good, but given our multiple decades of experience on thinking through ballot assessments and things like that, can we finally, you talked about these sort of like continuous learning schools where people are used to being observed in a ongoing way, whether they're a student teacher or aide or, in like, many people come back and be like, oh, that sounds great, but like, how do you scale that to every district in the country? And so one of the things we're excited about is like, well, if technology can actually be built in the service of some of these things, maybe there is a way to scale a more continuous, like observational, more formative way of providing people feedback that doesn't break the bank, right? Another sort of initiative that our ETS sort of is pushing on for with the Carnegie Foundation is the Skills for the Future initiative, which is really about thinking about like what is it, what are the actual skills of the future, and how do we sort of move away from the credit hour potentially as the primary metric of learning, primary unit for learning. And so you talk about bells, buses, and butts. It's about that, about moving away from focusing so much on seat time. I would love to
And
sort of
think
get your
about the power
perspective.
of if we can
Yeah,
just
go
stop
ahead.
on that Carnegie unit
Yeah,
perspective. I mean, think about all that has driven. And it started as a way to pay professors back in the early 90s. So here we are still looking at that in terms of accreditation, educator preparation, like all the professions driven by credit hours, moving from quarter to semester, but it's still there. And it's still the way we're talking about how we pay people. I mean, it's sort of insane that it's still here all of these years later and has constructed systems around it. So I am super excited about the work that Carnegie and ETS are doing together. And I've been in those conversations early on. And
yeah,
and again, it's working within those structures. So I'm really interested to hear more about the thinking of AI in that space. I certainly have my own thoughts about how it can help with the personalization. But when you are
yeah.
all in that think tank room, and I'm sure somebody could look and see fire on top of that building while you're thinking about this, because it's got to be super hot and super exciting. So, what are some of the big things for you that you think about? Like, if we could change this, then we could really get to this assessment space that would help us determine those durable skills and the things that are cross cutting across content.
Well, so I by no means the expert here, and sort of a lot of this will be above my pay grade. But what I can say is, I think some of the areas that we are very excited about finally sort of achieving some level of critical technological sort of sophistication around are things like simulations, right? There are a lot of high quality simulation like vendors or I wouldn't say a lot, but there are a handful of them out there. But the best ones, at least today, still rely on human beings on the other side to sort of really power the sort of the spontaneity and the dynamicness that you really want to really get true fidelity in seeing how people will react to an unpredictable situation, right? Especially we're talking about something like, we're looking a lot more into things like, especially for Praxis, not only focusing on the subject matter areas, but also on some of the more like universal skills that every teacher should have, like classroom management, right? Or positive classroom climate. So like building a simulation around that, for example, is incredibly hard and challenging because the last thing you want is for somebody to be able to figure out the right sequence of things to say to get to the end goal when the simulation is trying to assess you on classroom management, right? Because the whole point is how do you deal with unpredictable or unknown variables, right? The unknown unknowns and then right those sorts of things. And so we're starting to see the sort of the beginnings of the ability not only sort of have like that sort of dynamic real interactions happen on a one-to-one level, but also potentially a one-to-many level. So as we start to see potentially simulations where you could have a teacher being assessed, a potential teacher being assessed, and multiple sort of LMs acting as students in the room and all interacting with each other and with the teacher in a dynamic way, that sort of is something that even a year ago would probably have been beyond the scope of possible. But now we're starting to see that
Yeah.
might be so things like that I think are sort of what's getting us excited. And then also the ability for AI to become better at the actual scoring or the rubric sort of assessment on the back end too. Like a big part of this going from like a low stakes to a higher stakes or more standards based environment, you need the ability to score these things at scale. And the scoring is expensive and it's tedious and right now requires for these types of assessments would require an inordinate amount of human graders. And so that sort of pushes the price point up, then it becomes out of reach for a lot of states and other places to recommend or require those types of assessments. You don't want people to have to spend, you don't want to require somebody to spend $400 on a test, right, to get their license, things like that.
Well,
So,
I have faith in y'all that you're all going to figure this out for
thank you.
sure. Yeah. Yeah.
So, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was reflecting as you were talking about that experience for teachers with AI. This was pre-pandemic. I went to an EdTech conference and I don't even think it was focused on EdTech. It was just technology convening here in Salt Lake City. And I remember going into a room where somebody was trying to develop a new tool. And this is virtual reality. You'd put on the headset and you had this avatar as a teacher. And I was the role of the principal. And the whole point of this was to learn how to give feedback to teachers. Now, when I'm working with technology, I'm certainly not an expert, but I'm also not a doofus when it comes to technology. I'm not afraid of it. So I like to try and break the system a little bit. So I was trying to punk the system with this avatar and it was good. Like I was having a hard time fooling it. But the avatar, that was the interaction with the teacher who was struggling and teaching the principal how to have or the supervisor how to have crucial conversations. That's really what you were practicing. And it was so real that I got lost in the moment. Now, think about AI today versus 6 years ago. It was very rudimentary back then, and yet seems so real. I have not seen that tool ever come to fruition or developed. It's probably out there somewhere.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
just the notion that, to your point, that we can use AI to practice in a very safe way because you get into the dynamic of the classroom and you're relying on all these little bodies in there that come with their own personalities, issues, etc. So giving teachers the opportunity to practice in a safe space and then show what they know using technology, I think is really an interesting and promising way to go forward.
Yeah, I mean, it reminds me, I'm going to butcher the quote, but it's like, in times of pressure, we don't rise to like the goals that we set. We fall to the systems that we put in place or something like that, right?
Yeah.
And so it's the same thing. Like a teacher who hasn't been able to really develop those habits and abilities and develop the confidence on how to deal with those situations in a safe space, when put under a duress and having to deal with that situation for real, maybe for the first time, they're going to fall back on whatever sort of intuition or heuristics that they sort of naturally will gravitate towards, which might not always be the best, right? I guess along those lines, going back to like the skills per teacher and other things, like if you had to sort of say like, this here are the skills for the future for leaders, school leaders of tomorrow, or district leaders or educational leaders. Where do you see yourself or others sort of wanting people to focus their attention and their energies on when it comes to building their own skills?
Yeah, it's an important question. I mean, I still believe wholeheartedly that the core function of a good leader is to create a culture and a system where high levels of learning can thrive. And there's a lot that goes into that. But I think our school leaders have to be very astute at what quality teaching and high levels of learning look like. You can't just assume that you go in and put policies in place and everything will fall into order. So I so appreciate the literacy push running across the state with the science of reading. And for us here in Utah, and I know in many, many states, that requires 100 hours of training to get up to speed for many of our educators. And principals that sit there right along with their teachers get that. But then we've gone a step further to help our school leaders with change management, not just the literacy part, but what does this look like in terms of change management and changing a culture and putting a culture of literacy and math in place? So we have to keep that the focus. Like learning should always be the focus of what we do for kids in schools, setting up systems, cultures, and procedures so that we can help students do their best work. I think the second thing is really knowing how to engage families and communities. Context matters a lot. And I don't know that we always do our part in helping families. It's why we've seen some rifts in the system, just not intentional lack of transparency or not intentional in not engaging families, but just not being proactive about it. And so then families feel like they're surprised at things and they should never feel surprised. They should always know what's happening at their school to some degree. So I think that whole piece about helping not only just work with families and communities, but being really proactive and bringing communities into the schools and students out into the communities. I like to get into classrooms and teach once in a while. As a superintendent, I was out in schools a lot, and I was in a school that was in one of our more economically impoverished communities, and yet rich with culture and language and so many different opportunities for students to learn from each other. But I was talking to them about this was a junior achievement lesson. And so we were talking about marketing plans. And I thought, I'm going to use Google Earth and see what's around the school. So I just went out to a walkable radius. So could kids walk a couple of blocks anywhere around the school? What would they encounter in terms of businesses?
Yep.
And I was surprised at all the little businesses. So I asked the students what businesses were around them, and they could only come up with the, local markets. Like for us, it would be a Maverick or a 7-Eleven or whatever those things are. The gas station small market combo. There were a couple of them, but there were a lot of other things that kids had no idea. So what does a principal know about the community and the resources, the people that are in your community that maybe hesitate to come into the school and can share, and the businesses that kids could go out to and learn from, and those great interactions that students have so they can think about their futures differently. There are just so many opportunities. And I think a lot of our principals would tell you that they don't have time, but it's in how you structure your time. And you can actually save time if you learn how to bring communities into your school to help. And then maybe, the third thing is, again, just how to really drive continuous improvement. And that goes back to what I was talking about earlier with not just change management, but what's that cycle of inquiry and cycle of improvement, much like Sunburst Elementary that I highlighted earlier, where they have a teacher academy. How do you engage every school, whether you're a teacher academy or not, where it's everyone's job to learn? And so, going back to that core focus on student success through quality materials and effective teaching strategies. Second, really bringing communities in and pushing students out into the community so you have that stronger community connection, because that's where cultural respect and all of that, be culturally responsive, comes into play as well. And then the third piece is really driving continuous improvement. So thinking very strongly about that culture of always doing better and doing what we can to help each other do our best work.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate your second point. Because I think the point, and not that points one and point three aren't also important, and obviously continuous improvement and building a culture where everybody's a learner, I think is critical. But the second one is interesting to me because I think that to me feels like one of the greatest, like one of the biggest opportunities for K-12, right? Like there's no better distribution for local access than the public school, right? Like, or like than K-12 schools. They're already situated in every single community in our country, right? And so the hard part's already been done in some ways, right? Like the infrastructure's already there. Uh, and like so I had the good fortune when I graduated grad school to be able to adjunct immediately after graduation. I adjuncted and taught undergrad, taught business law in undergrad. You know, the concept of the adjunct is like pretty common in higher ed, right? Like the idea of bringing in practitioners from the outside in a part-time capacity, sort of like create that sort of like per permeable membrane between industry or the outside world and the actual power of academia. And it seems as though, if anything, like that should be an area of huge opportunity for K-12, right? Like it's like bringing in the expertise of your community to become part of the educational fabric of that curriculum. You know, obviously, I think we're going to see an increasing interest of in places like CTE and other things over the coming years, especially as there's a greater shift on workforce readiness and job readiness and things like that. And I'm hopeful that that'll actually open up more opportunities for those types of like community sort of engagement as well. So it's not just about sort of knowing who's around you, but actually formally bringing them in to be part of like the teaching ecosystem or the education ecosystem that you could cultivate.
I mean, we've got some great concrete examples here in Utah, and we've had a lot of CTE collaboratives for years. I mean, I think it was required when I was in high school, but we have about 13 different pathways, and we have industry advisors for each one of those pathways. And you have the courses in high school, so it's required to take at least a full credit of CTE in high school for graduation. And then we have completers that go on and complete more. However, I will say in that space, we have all these industry experts, but we always have people saying, how can I help? I don't think there's a week that goes by that somebody doesn't ask, I'd really like to get involved in education. What can I do to support and help? So I'll give you a couple of examples of where industries really leaned in. And this is where I think we're headed across the country, and ETS and Carnegie's work play into this as well. But so, for example, we have Stadler Rail, who is out of Germany, Switzerland. I'm going to get that wrong. Germany, I believe. So Stadler Rail is a company that of course just does just what it sounds like. And they come in and they work with our students, and the students go work in industry. So our high school students are doing apprenticeship, internships, and externships right with industry. You've heard about all the apprenticeship programs, and we're trying to put those on alert that it's not just in one area, but let's see if we can get apprenticeships in all of the pathways in all the areas. We have high schools that are CTE high schools and CAPS programs. So it's the applied programs. Kids are working right with industry in marketing and business, in cybersecurity, in pharmaceuticals, in culinary arts, in recording and video. I mean, the list goes on. So you've got things like Stadler Rail. You've got another one with Boeing, and they do some small manufacturing contract work as well. So kids are learning how to make the composites for manufacturing and then install those and create those into wings that go onto Boeing airplanes. And they're doing that right with the community. So you can go to every state in our country, I believe now, and find those kinds of programs. The question is, how do we provide greater access so that every student, if they want the opportunity, can engage in an apprenticeship? So in Utah, we're calling that first credential, and we have legislation behind
Mm,
it. And we want students to have a first credential when they leave high school. Now, that could be an associate's degree, but it could also be an industry certificate. So we're in the process of determining the criteria and what those industry certificates look like so that there's not this gap and kids are wondering what to do. They can save money by going right into a post-secondary program and continuing to work and stack on additional credentials and have a career that allows them to be part of the middle class.
fantastic. So I think we're coming up on sort of the back end of our conversation. So I'll sort of wrap up with this final question, which is people who are listening to this are likely going to be in all different stages of their career. If you sort of had to look back on your own career, what what advice or what thoughts would you maybe share back to your younger self when you were earlier in your career that you sort of learned now around sort of being a lifelong educator and sort of committing yourself to this space?
Um, you know, looking back when I was a young educator, I had the good fortune to have parents and principals who knew how to help me be independent and interdependent. So rather than admiring a problem, I would try to solve the problem. And I appreciated good leaders who allowed me and supported me and helped me solve problems. So if I saw something that needed to be done, I knew it was my responsibility not just come and explain the problem, but to have a possible solution or idea. And I started doing that as a young teacher and created some great traditions and great opportunities beyond the classroom by doing so. And I think that reputation for being a problem solver and a doer led me to many positions. I'm not terribly creative, but I knew people that were creative. So I knew how to surround myself with the people I needed to get things done. And I'm pretty sure I had the best team on the planet when I was a superintendent. And they were all doers and so caring, people first. So I looking back, I don't have any regrets, but the two things that I really focused on that I think helped me find success in a lot of different areas of my career were not just admiring the problem, but being a problem solver and putting relationships first. And those two ingredients enabled me to get a lot of things accomplished on behalf of our kiddos.
Dr. Dixon, thank you again for your time today. I really appreciate it. And I expect our listeners to also appreciate it as well. I wish you all the best at University of Utah and keep in touch.
Thank you, Vinay. Go Utes.
Well, thanks for listening to Praxis Journeys. You can subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. And if you know someone who'd find this conversation helpful, feel free to share it with them. I'm Vinay Ganti, and until next time, keep learning, keep leading, and keep working toward the kind of change our students deserve.